So let's get started. We are studying, as you know, Strange New World, book by Carl Trueman. It's marvelous. I would get a copy and read it. It's sold about 300,000 copies in total with the prior book. If you don't understand publishing, for a book of an academic type book to sell in the hundreds of thousands of copies is unheard of. Okay, and it's representative of how topical and relevant the topic is right now in our culture. Okay, I just wanted to begin with, I was going to read Psalm 67 as an opening, and then we'll pray at the end. But I was so taken with the lyrics of what we're singing in the anthem today that I wanted to start there. So just bear with me for a minute. It's beautiful. The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want. You will, of course, recognize it, but the lyrics are very nice. I shall not want, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want. I shall not want for more. How could I ask for more? He leads by still water, and I shall not want, I shall not want, I shall not want. He leads by still water, and I shall not want. I shall not want for more. How could I ask for more? He is enough for every need. We should start singing, huh? He is enough for every broken dream. I shall not want. I'm satisfied with what he gives. He will provide and faithfully supply, and I shall not want. He leads through the valley, and I shall not want. I shall not want, I shall not want. He leads through the valley, and I shall not want. I shall not want. He is enough for every need. He is enough for every broken dream. I shall not want. I'm satisfied with what he gives. He will provide and faithfully supply. And I shall not want. He is the night, he is the day. He is the sun, he is the shade. He is the ocean. In every song, he is my theme. His mercy calls us back to home. Back to home. I can't help but sing now. No, I won't do that. I'm a choir guy. I feast at his table, and I shall not want. I shall not want. I shall not want. I feast at his table, and I shall not want. I shall not want for more. It's beautiful. Okay, we are talking about Carl Trueman's book, and one of the things I love about Carl Trueman is his biting British wit, and he has the accent to go along with it. And in the chapter we're studying today, which is chapter 7, also lesson 7 in the video series, Trueman talks about the banning of the book. So in your handout that I gave you, the first glossary term I have is cancel culture. And you can read, you've heard about cancel culture, and you can read what that means. But the example is Ryan T. Anderson. Ryan T. Anderson wrote the foreword to this book. And he's also the author of another book that's called When Harry Became Sally. And it came out in February of 2021, and it was canceled by Amazon. It was banned by Amazon that month, which, of course, adversely impacted the sales. And Trueman notes that the banning of Anderson's book occurred while Mao and Hitler and Stalin all remained authors in good standing on Amazon. And in fact, Amazon, in the very month that they banned it, in February of 2021, in that very month, Amazon was pushing and encouraging its customers to buy Ted Kaczynski's book, The Manifesto Technology Slavery. Now, that might not ring a bell, but Ted Kaczynski was also known as the Unabomber. And so this is what Trueman said in his quote on page, I think it's 146 on page 7. Even in the worst case scenario, Anderson's book is unlikely to cause a world war, lead to millions of deaths by famine, or inspire a domestic bombing campaign. Somehow Anderson had committed a more serious crime in the modern therapeutic world. He had challenged the dominant narrative of the trans revolution and called into question whether it really was delivering on the promises it made. And so Trueman's not only witty, he's fearless. He goes where theologians should go these days and do not have the courage to do. He's not afraid to speak truth to the powerful, and the powerful nowadays are those who are able to cancel books that do not conform to the ideology of our time. Trueman speaks truth in a way that makes you think, which is perhaps the strongest recommendation I can make for reading the book. Plus, he has that great British accent, which makes him sound more intelligent than he is, and you see that in the video. So I bring up Ryan T. Anderson because in the foreword, he says the following about Trueman's book, Strange New World, which is what the video series is based on. And Anderson summarizes Strange New World as follows, quote, "At the risk of oversimplifying what Carl Trueman accomplishes in Strange New World, I would summarize the broad arc of his work as an account of, 1, how the person became a self, 2, how the self became sexualized, and 3, how sex became politicized." Now, in our first two classes, we were dealing mostly about the early stuff, how the person became a self, and today and next week we're moving into the how the self became sexualized and how, in particular, sex became politicized. So I'm not sure what it says about me that my colleagues thought I should present this chapter on sex, but we drew straws and I drew the short one. No, that's a joke. That's actually a joke. That is not what happened. I actually wanted to be the person who presented Chapter 7, and that's because of my past work in journalism. I've written and read a lot about these subjects, and I really have a very keen interest in how ideas shape culture. How ideas shape culture, and they do. And in the shaping of the culture, it impacts us in our individual lives, and we're going to hear about that in a second from two special guests that are going to come up here and speak after the video. So, LGBTQ+ is an acronym that is probably familiar to you. It, of course, stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and plus being all other categories that haven't been mentioned in the LGBTQ. And this coalition, the point that Trueman makes in his video is that this coalition is without a doubt the greatest political sex too, greatest political success story of the last half century. And so a question that Trueman ponders is, how is it that they have become so politically dominant? And one example of their political clout that he cites in the chapter is that within hours of his inauguration as president on January 20th, 2021, President Joe Biden signed into law an executive order titled Preventing and Combating Discrimination on the Basis of Gender Identity and Sexual Orientation. Among other things, what this executive order did is it required public schools to open women's restrooms and changing rooms to biological men identifying as women. It also required women's sports to be opened up to biological men. And that has moved further to an entire rewriting of the federal education civil rights law, Title IX of which deals with women's issues, women's sports. And the critics of the rewriting of Title IX, including this woman, Riley Gaines, She's a swimmer at the University of Kentucky. She had to compete in 2022 in the NCAA championships against Leah Thomas. Leah Thomas was a biological male who still had all his genitalia, who insisted that he was a female, and she swam against Leah Thomas in the championship event. They tied. They had a tying time, but the award was given to Leah Thomas by the NCAA officials who were present at the time. You can draw your own conclusions about that. But she is speaking in Cranberry Township on Friday evening, May 31st. And if you're interested in attending her presentation, it's a banquet that's being hosted by the Pennsylvania Family Institute. Michael Geer, the president of that institute, was a podcast guest of ours most recently. If you're interested in attending, we have open seats. Bill Mahaffey and Joanne and Louise and I are hosting a few tables at the event. And if you'd like to come and hear Riley Gaines' story. It's quite compelling. So the evisceration of Title IX is one of the fracture points that has emerged with feminists. And so the point that Trueman is making in the video is that although outsiders may see LGBTQ plus as a monolithic, a political group, there are actually fracture points that are developing within the group, and one of them is between feminists and men who become women who are then claiming to be women. And this is what Germaine Greer, who's the matriarch of modern feminism, said as follows. Her quotation is in Chapter 7 of Trueman's book. It's quite sarcastic. Stay with it. Imagine that, Germaine Greer being sarcastic. I've asked my doctor to give me long ears and liver spots, and I'm going to wear a brown coat, but that won't turn me into a Cocker Spaniel. And because this is a Christian setting, I can't tell you the expletive that was inserted before Cocker Spaniel, but you could look it up for the verbatim quotation online. And so Greer is among the feminists who's not pleased in the least with the physical and chemical gerrymandering of the male body, which does not make it female, despite what a person claims it is. And there are many gay men, in fact, who've come out, so to speak, in the same way, that they are in opposition to some of the trans ideology. And that's because lesbians, gay men, bisexuals all assume the sex binary of male and female is grounded in basic biology. And that point is denied by the trans ideology. And then queer, in case you're wondering, there is a definition of queer on your sheet, because there's a lot of glossary terms. Queer ideology is similar to trans in that it denies, as it does, the stability of traditional categories of male and female in favor of a fluid and ever-changing range of multiple sexual identities. And so the addition of the T for trans and the Q for queer to the LBGT or LBG coalition, yeah. I'm not going to use the joke that circulates often about LBGTQ, is in a very real sense, it's incoherent. It doesn't fix together. Okay, and then there's one more point that I'd like to make, and then Bob will roll the tape, be 10 minutes as usual, that Trueman makes in our episode today that I'd like to underscore. It's an important point. We need to make a clear pastoral distinction in the way we address LGBTQ plus matters. There's a big distinction between the political movement, pushing for social change, and the individuals for whom this is their particular issue or their particular struggle. As Christians, we need to be ruthless with the former, with the political movement, but we should never lose sight of the individuals who are involved. We shouldn't conflate the two issues and subjects. When we address individuals in our congregation for whom this is their issue or who are touched by the issue, perhaps you have folks in your family, even within this church family or adjacent to it, we need to be pastoral. We need to avoid violent rhetoric that so often characterizes addressing political issues in our nation. Okay, so we're going to watch the video. Then two colleagues of ours, Melissa Loisis, who is a biological female, who identifies as a biological female, and Chad Winkler, a biological male who identifies as a biological male. I have that right, don't I, Chad? Yeah. And neither Chad nor Melissa will offer you their preferred pronouns. And they'll come up to the podium and address a question that Trueman suggests at the end of chapter 7 in the book. I put the question at the very bottom of your syllabus. It's a simple one. How have the cultural changes brought about through the movement, LGBTQ plus movement, affected your work? And as you'll hear, trans movement in particular has had profound impact on their professional lives, far more than you might have imagined. So let's watch the video.
In an earlier lecture, we talked about how sex had moved from being a private, personal thing to being perhaps the most pressing political issue of our day. We're all familiar with movie stars and sports stars who come out, who parade their sexual identities to the world in a way that is not just reflective of who they are as individuals, but is seen to make political demands upon society. We're all familiar with the LGBTQ+ acronym, standing for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, plus. These are the letters that define the political movement that has changed the landscape of politics in this country in a way, if you like, if we step back from making any moral judgment on it, in a way that is remarkable and very impressive. What I want to do in this lecture is reflect upon that list of initials. Reflect upon the LGBTQ+ alliance in a way that will hopefully help us to understand it a bit better, and may well help us also to understand how the church might think about responding to it. You've seen the rainbow flag. Probably during Pride Month you've been confronted with pride marches. What is often presented in the public eye is a movement of unity, a movement that has brought disparate groups claiming various sexual identities together in a common cause. What is perhaps not so obvious is that this alliance is not as natural as one might think. The unity is somewhat more negative or perhaps more specious than one might imagine. There is, in fact, not a whole lot that binds the L, the G, the B, the T, and the Q together. When you think about it, that makes a kind of sense. If you identify as a lesbian or as gay, you are identifying as somebody who is defined by their attraction to somebody of the same sex. You are assuming there that sex is to some extent biologically determined. You are attracted to those who share the same bodily characteristics as yourself. The L and the G, and indeed the B, tend to assume that there are such things as men and women, that identity is biologically determined and basic, and very, very important for their own understanding of their sexual desires. But then when you think about the Q and the T, the queer and the transgender aspect of those initials, what is it that these initials deny? It's the very thing that the L, the G, and the B affirm. And that is that one's biological sex is significant for one's actual gender. What we have in the LGBTQ+ movement is not an alliance built upon a common positive ground, but rather an alliance built upon that which each of the groups opposes. What is it that each of these letters opposes? Well, it can be summarized using the kind of jargon that the sexual revolution uses as this: a common opposition to white heteronormative patriarchy. We might summarize that in less arcane language by saying what is opposed is the idea that heterosexual white males and their desires are normative for the rest of society. Each of those groups, the L, the G, the B, the T, and the Q, messes with that basic assumption that white male heterosexuals are normative for our understanding of human nature and of humanity. And they're united by their opposition to that. However, as the dominance of white heterosexual normativity in our society weakens, what's emerging are fractures, breakdowns within the LGBTQ+ alliance that I think are very instructive for us as we think about how to respond. The most obvious fracture is that between the T and the L and the G and the B. If you are a transgender person, then you deny the significance of biology for gender, for who you are. If you're part of the L, the G, and the B, then you affirm it. And that's leading to some very strange incidents. For example, is a lesbian who is not attracted to a man who's transitioned to being a woman. Is that lesbian transphobic? The conservative journalist, gay journalist, Andrew Sullivan, has been accused of transphobia because he says he's not sexually attracted to women who've transitioned to being men. He says they're still women. We see that fracture emerging also relative to the feminist movement. A figure such as Germaine Greer, for example, once a feminist scourge of religious conservatives, now seems at times to be uncannily close to religious conservatives in her claims that trans women, that's men who've transitioned to being women, are actually not women at all and have no right to claim the history of the oppression of women as their own. They're really men attempting to usurp that history for their own purposes. So the first thing to know about the LGBTQ+ alliance is it is unstable. And it is starting to fracture at this point. Now, that may not be good news, because if my argument's correct that the LGBTQ+ alliance is built upon the notion of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and that's where it has drawn its unifying strength in the past, then as the movement fractures, that merely indicates that the old enemy has become very, very weak. That actually the revolution that the LGBTQ movement was committed to has by and large taken place. That heterosexual normativity is disappearing from society. But the second thing to notice about this movement is how incredibly successful it has been. If you look at the history of LGBTQ+ rights in the United States, it really started to take off in the late 1960s with the Stonewall riots, but it has become supercharged in the last 10 or 15 years. The question then becomes, how is this group that represents only a small proportion of the American population, even if you combine all of its different elements together, how has this group that represents such a small part of the American population become so politically dominant? Well, there are numerous reasons for this. Part of it is the overall narrative I've been telling about the rise of this psychologized self, the rise of this notion of the self as being constituted by inner feelings and desires. When that becomes the plausible way of thinking about humanity, then the LGBTQ+ movement's view of humanity becomes itself very, very plausible. But a second reason is this. It's been a strong community. If you read the works of people who've been converted out of the LGBTQ+ movement, one of the things that's striking about the accounts of life they give when they were part of that movement is how real and strong the community was. These people were in and out of each other's houses. They had each other's backs. They were very supportive of each other. They loved and cared for each other. The strong community that exists in the LGBTQ plus world is what made them a potent social force. Now, bearing these things in mind, I think we can now begin to think about, well, what might that mean for us practically in our local churches? How might we learn from the history of the LGBTQ plus movement in a way that might help us to respond to it? Well, the first thing to do, I think, is that we should not be too pessimistic about the future of this movement. It is starting to fracture and fragment. It's not the solid revolutionary principle that perhaps it once seemed. Now, that may be cold comfort when we take into account that a reason for that is that the opposition is now so weak. But it reminds us, I think, that there are still opportunities to speak to the different groups here in ways that might speak powerfully to them in their individual circumstances. Secondly, I think we can learn positively from the community aspect. History teaches us that communities, marginal communities, can prove very, very potent and very, very strong. One of the things I think we should be doing as a Christian church is reflecting upon how we can be communities in our local contexts. Certainly conservative evangelical folk have often focused very much on the doctrinal elements of Christianity. And that's right and proper because Christianity is, at base, a doctrinal religion. But it's also a community. We need to think about how our coming marginalization might actually make us stronger and more powerful communities in our local settings. Thirdly, I think we need to make a clear pastoral distinction in the way we address LGBTQ plus matters. There's a big distinction, it seems to me, between the LGBTQ plus movement as a political movement, pushing for social change, and as a collection of individuals for whom this is their particular issue or their particular struggle. And I want to suggest that as Christians we need to be kind of ruthless with the former. We need to be ruthless with the political movement. But we should never lose sight of the individuals who are involved. We mustn't conflate the two. When we address the individuals in our congregations or in our communities for whom this is their issue, for whom this is the thing that they struggle with, perhaps even within our own families, perhaps even within the church, we need to be pastoral. We need to be careful to avoid the rhetoric, the violent rhetoric that so often characterizes addressing political issues in our nation. So perhaps the discussion that flows from this lecture might focus on that. Have you had experience in your own life of how to address these kind of issues with friends, with people you love and care for? Have you done some things that you now regret and think were counterproductive? Have you done other things that worked? How do you think the Bible teaches us to address movements pressing for things that are counterproductive, sinful and wrong? And how does it teach us to address individuals who are wrestling with these particular issues in their personal lives? That, I think, is where the discussion has to go today. It has to focus on the local, and it has to focus on a number of careful distinctions we make between the movement and individuals.
Yeah, a little bit more. Okay, good morning. Interesting stuff, right? I will try to keep this short. If you see me going way beyond 5, start doing this, okay. All right. Maybe some of you know I used to work at the Scott Township Public Library briefly for about 3 years. I think I started in 2018 or 2019, probably 2019, and then we had 1 year of normal and then COVID, which was abnormal. But I'm not actually a librarian by trade. Years and years ago, I had a secondary English degree and taught high school English for 6 years. But ultimately decided that was not for me. So when I went to the library, I was thinking, good way to use my training, part-time, I could close to home, still be home for Marcus. He was in middle school. How did I notice things starting to go off the rails? The pronouns, actually. We started getting communications from CLP Maine, which is the big library, Big Daddy Library in Oakland. And all of a sudden, pronouns were showing up in the signatures of the senders. So that was the first inclination, I guess. Then I noticed one of our librarians was expecting, and she had her baby and went on maternity leave. So I picked up some of her tasks, one of which was processing new materials. Well, you're getting new materials all the time. There's a limited amount of shelf space. So things are getting called and sold at book sales or donated, and other new things are coming in. And what we kept seeing was more and more of the LGBTQ yada yada coming in all these books, especially for young adults, which was super alarming because young adult, I guess is a squishy term, but according to Mount Lebanon Library, it's maybe like grades 6 through 12. That's how they identify it. Has its own section. Upper St. Clair, same thing. Scott Township, it's all mixed in. But where it got crazy was they were really focusing on that group especially. And then it kind of trickled down, and you started to see it in kids' books. I went to the Mount Lebanon Library, took a little field trip. And some of these I noticed, too, as you're putting things back on the shelves. That's one of your tasks. So I'm putting books back like Julian is a mermaid. And Julian is this little person that I think is supposed to be a boy. And he is fixated on what you find out as you read the book are transvestites that he calls mermaids. Okay? Looks so innocent, right? And the pictures are beautiful. And he goes and hangs out with his abuela, right? And she's very permissive. She's very understanding that he wants to be a mermaid, right? Mermaid. Then they go to a wedding for 2 women. Then I looked around. Wait, it gets better. Just when you weren't alarmed enough. An ABC of equality. Words like feminist, gender, xenophobe. It's a board book for kids who eat books. Okay? That's what they're for.
What age is that for?
That is literally beginning reader for kids, little ones who are chewing on it. Yeah. Yeah, this is the kind of stuff that's out there. This one I don't even have to show you. Anti-racist baby, not on topic, but still pretty alarming. Okay. And then you have Second Dad Summer, which is about a kid who goes to spend summer with his dad and his dad's boyfriend. Okay. These are all just hanging out on the shelf. I didn't really have to look too hard. I know I'm probably not getting on camera here. But they're out there, and they're pushing them. And where it gets really sketchy is you have kids who are precocious readers, and you're trying to preview everything because they're going to end up in that young adult section. And that's the kind of stuff they're going to find. This is kids. I didn't check out any of the young adults. But where I really saw it, focused, new books, they're pushing this. It's not just permitting it, it's really promoting it and trying to make it normal, like Carl was saying. Manga, a lot of the graphic novels, really prevalent there because they're definitely pushing the whole gender bender issue. So, all right, trying to stay on topic. The budgets are going to be used. A huge chunk of library budget is new books, and they're going to use it up. Because if they don't use it up, they don't get as much money, right? This is how taxpayer-funded things work. So I would say get involved, be a regular patron. You can request certain books, request good books that are classics, that are timeless, that are going to have themes that don't involve making kids question who they are. It's wrong. But get involved. You can have a say. Pride Month is coming. Be prepared. Go to the library, comment. If it's pride display, you can comment. You can write a comment, you can contact them, you can email. Try to get involved because it's like the Charlie Kirk solution. When he goes and talks to these people on campus, he says, get married, have babies, right? So if we apply that thinking, you could say, okay, get involved and request good books and be part of it or join the board or do something and have a voice, because that's partly taxpayer funded. And I saw it in the schools as well. Last thing, and then I'll wrap up. When I left the library, that was one of the reasons I left. There were several. But the work I'm doing now it's very nice, and it's for someone I knew before. But she has a consulting firm for nonprofits, mostly artsy nonprofits. And it's there too, I guess because of the arts. And also because so much of it is grant money. It's funded by giant foundations, but also smaller groups and things. And when I'm helping to look for grant money, that's who they want for the grants a lot of times. They're appealing to the transgender community. They're appealing to people who are questioning not just minorities. That's not enough anymore, right? You have to have an abuela who affirms you when you dress as a girl. So it's crazy.
Thank you, Mom.
You're welcome. It's hard to not go.
Don't need to adjust the mic for you.
Yeah, right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Tom, for having me talk a little bit today. As probably all of you know, I'm one of the trumpet players with the Pittsburgh Symphony. I've been in the symphony now. This is my 15th official season and 18th overall. I played a couple one-year positions with the orchestra, and then won my audition in my third year, and then I officially started the season after that. The PSO does between 100 and 120 concerts a year. We usually go on a European tour every 2 years. We're actually going back to Europe this August for 3 weeks. So I already appreciate you watching over Alyssa and my kids, and as I'm gone, and hopefully the toilet won't explode or anything bad. A couple weeks ago, we get weekly emails from the Pittsburgh Symphony, kind of talking about schedule changes and all that stuff. But under the title of future events, we got a notice in the memo that said this: post-concert drag cabaret. PSO Unity is thrilled to announce a special post-concert performance featuring local drag queen Kylie Fortissimo. After the Pops concert on Saturday, May 11th, the party continues in the Grand Lobby with a sensational drag cabaret hosted by the one and only Kylie Fortissimo. Get ready for a night of outrageous performances and flute-fueled frenzy as Kylie dazzles with her campy charisma and flair. Inspired by the glitz of Broadway, the playfulness of Barbie, and the totally tubular vibes of the 80s, this soiree promises to be an extravaganza of epic proportions. Bars will be open and will feature signature cocktails and mocktails. Grab a drink, strike a pose, and let the good times roll at the most fabulous after party in town. So, one of the things about growing up down in Morgantown, West Virginia, is that my parents would take me up to hear Pittsburgh Symphony concerts, and honestly, that's where I fell in love with the orchestra. I loved the sound of the orchestra. At the time, I was studying with the principal trumpet, who would become a colleague of mine later, and anybody who's walked into Heinz Hall, you see this glorious grand lobby. A lot of people talk about the Christmas tree at Christmas time, and yes, I call it a Christmas tree to my colleagues. It's just a real spectacle, really, to come. You're hearing great art. The symphony is probably the premier arts organization in Pittsburgh. Obviously, concerts that we put on are of the highest artistic level. So I decided to write to our COO when I got this memo, and I just said, okay, well, I've got some questions. And I had explained my PSO history, and I went on to say, what demographic is the PSO hoping to appeal to by having a drag cabaret? Is the PSO trying to appeal to families like mine, families that value stability in the home, discipline, faithfulness, a strong work ethic, a love for the gift of music that God has given to us, developing a passion for classical music in particular, instilling and solidifying good moral and ethical values in our kids? Or is the PSO officially finished with appealing to families like mine with post-concert events? How does inviting a drag queen performance after a concert help promote these values? Where is the wisdom in equating the two? How does inviting a drag queen performer further the excellence of the PSO and encourage all of us to be at the very top of our artistic game? I then asked, would the PSO be willing to have a faith-based cocktail hour after a concert? I mentioned that I'm an elder at Beverly Heights Church, and I said there are a lot of people that go to our church that either have been or maybe will be subscribers or regular attenders of concerts. I asked our COO, is the drag queen performance designed to cater to those people? What would be the best way for me to tell the members of my church that they should attend the drag cabaret performance on May 11th? Would the PSO consider a drag queen performance after a youth symphony concert? So many of you went to go see Kate Zhang several weeks ago conduct the youth symphony. We had a tremendous support of probably 40 or 50 of us that went and heard the concert. I wonder if they would consider a drag cabaret performance after a youth symphony concert, and if not, why not? I also asked him, what does the PSO have planned for my church's demographic? If you're going to have a drag cabaret performance, where is the faith-based, cocktail hour? And I even offered. I said I would be the first one to participate in that. I think it would be a great time, and it would seemingly be a lot more inviting and inclusive than a drag cabaret performance. So he wrote back to me and said, quote, I do want to express that the PSO and Heinz Hall are committed to being welcoming to everyone, including communities of faith, of which I'm also a member. He continues, these pre- and post-concert activities are not part of the orchestra's artistic program. They are intended to give opportunities for anyone to feel welcome and find their community at Heinz Hall. The May 11th event, get this, the May 11th event is not for me, and maybe that's the point. It's for a community that doesn't normally feel welcome in Heinz Hall. Even for communities, I don't know where he's getting that data, by the way. Even for communities that regularly enjoy Heinz Hall, I still welcome them to incorporate Heinz Hall into their community building. I mentioned earlier that PSO Unity is the name of the organization that sponsored this drag cabaret performance. I wonder how unifying they would be if I went to them and said, so when are you planning the faith-based cocktail hour? I have my doubts that they would be into unity at that point. So what are the ways that we can get involved? Melissa already mentioned some really, really good ones. Get involved, write emails, talk to your leadership. Realize that we hold fast to the truth, as we hear every Sunday morning. We hold fast to the truth. We know what it is. The Bible says that God created men and women. That's not opinion. That's what is true. Don't assume that someone else will do the work for you. Write the email. Make a statement. Say something. Get involved. Be anti-fragile. Realize that not everyone will appreciate what you have to say, and that's okay. Also, you should participate, and you are not alone. Talk to your Christian colleagues and encourage them to also reach out to leadership. Courage is contagious. Ultimately, be faithful to what you believe, lean on Christ for direction, and be bold.
Okay, that was great. We'll have to close shortly because it is Confirmand Sunday, and choir and everybody has to get ready for the procession. But I just want to close with just one thought I'd like you to take away. I'll be back here next week. Art and I are doing next week's class together. Closing thought is, some of the things that we've talked about today in the class may seem ridiculous. And you might be thinking, why are you bothering me with this? And here's the reason. These are questions that you're now confronting in the strange new world we inhabit. There is no doubt about that whatsoever. I'll give you examples next week of Foster School and the first grade situation there that has led to our grandson Charlie being part of the academy. It's a madness that we must confront. It's sad. I know it's sad. It's overwhelmingly sad. I get it. okay? But having been around this for 45 years and seeing what's in the news media, I assure you the world we're occupying now in 2024 is not the world that I entered in 1979. I mean, I said that in my observations last week about news and how that's changed. And here's a perfect example. Last week, this is Thursday, May 2nd, just last week, it's front page of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Members celebrate end of LGBTQ plus exclusion. Now, there's about 30 paragraphs in the story, the first 28 of which are all about folks being happy that now that the United Methodists are now ordaining homosexual ministers, that they can be married. There can be gay marriage services in the Methodist Church. You know, you get to the 28th, the penultimate graph in the article, after telling you how happy everybody is about this. The penultimate graph says, oh, by the way, this has totally divided the Methodist Church. There are 8,000 churches that have left of the 30,000 Methodist churches that are now part of the global Methodist movement. There are more than 300 of those churches in Western Pennsylvania. If you're not a Methodist, you wouldn't know much about that, right? But this is what is happening. Here's another example. This is just in the past week. It's on the reverse side of your handout. This isn't, they call it an overture. The Presbytery of the Alleghenies that we're a member of, POA, we're trying to get out desperately. One of the reasons we're trying to get out is we see the writing on the wall. You don't have to have sat through a movie twice to know what the end is, okay? I've been in this church for 31 years. I went through the PCUSA situation. I know where this is headed, and you're already seeing this in the EPC. This is an overture, a petition that was voted on yesterday at the POA. I don't know what the outcome of the vote was, but the fact that they have to advance, two churches in Ohio that are part of the POA, the fact that they have to advance a petition to exclude, to toughen up the language that they're trying to bring to the General Assembly in the EPC on the issue of non-ordination of gay pastors is not an encouraging sign, to state the obvious. And I'll leave it at that. And there were 4 people who, on the record, voted against it. I don't want to go into that right now. I'll talk about it next week when we know what the outcome of the vote was. But some of our adversaries are the very people. And this is part of the culture and the air and the water that we're in and swimming in. Okay, let's just close with a word of prayer. And dear Heavenly Father, we thank you that you created us as man and woman. Lord, we give you thanks for your having ordained the world in an order that we are to follow as your followers of Christ, Lord. We thank you for Scripture. We thank you for the discipline that imposes upon us as your followers. We give great thanks, Lord, for our celebration today of Pentecost, but also of our Confirmand Sunday, and what a wonderful and glorious thing it is to hear young adults read their statements of faith so that they can walk with you, grow with you, and become nearer to you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thanks. Next week we'll finish it up.